The Albanian Rebellion of 1997, also known as the Albanian unrest of 1997, the Pyramid Crisis or the Albanian anarchy of 1997, was an uprising sparked by Ponzi scheme failures. Albania descended into civil disorder and violence in which the government was toppled and more than 2,000 people were killed. By January 1997, the people of Albania, who had lost $1.2 billion, took their protest to the streets. Beginning in February, thousands of citizens launched daily protests demanding reimbursement by the government, which they believed was profiting from the schemes. On 1 March, Prime Minister Aleksandar Meksi resigned, and on 2 March, President Sali Berisha declared a state of emergency. On the 11th of March, the Socialist Party of Albania won a major victory when their leader Bashkim Fino was appointed Prime Minister. However, the transfer of power did not halt the unrest, and protests spread to northern Albania. Although the government quelled revolts in the north, the ability of the government and military to maintain order began to collapse, especially in the southern half of Albania, which fell under the control of rebels and socialist forces. All major population centers were engulfed in demonstrations by the 13th of March, and foreign countries began to evacuate their citizens. These evacuations included Operation Libel, Operation Silver Wake and Operation Cosmas. The United Nations Security Council, in Resolution 1101, authorized a force of 7,000 on 28 March to direct relief efforts and to restore order to Albania. The UN feared the unrest would spread beyond Albania's borders and send refugees throughout Europe. On 15 April, the 7,000 troops launched Operation Sunrise, an Italian-led mission that helped restore rule of law. After the unrest, over 25,000 guns were transported to Kosovo and the guerrilla forces of the ethnic Albanian Kosovo Liberation Army received considerable armaments. Causes. In 1992, the Democratic Party of Albania won the nation's first free elections and Sali Berisha became president. In the mid-1990s, Albania was adopting a market economy, after years of socialist planned economy during the People's Socialist Republic of Albania. The rudimentary financial system became dominated by Ponzi schemes, and government officials endorsed a series of pyramid investment funds. By January 1997, the schemes could no longer make payments. The number of investors who had been lured by the promise of getting rich quick grew to include 2/3 of Albanians. It is estimated that close to $1.5 billion was invested in companies offering monthly interest rates ranging from 10% to 25%, while the average monthly income was around $80. People sold their homes to invest. Immigrants working in Greece and Italy transferred additional resources to the schemes. Political situation. On 26 May 1996, general elections were held and the Democratic Party won by a large margin. The Socialists accused the government of fraud and rejected the results. PS left the counting process and boycotted the parliament. On October 20, 1996, local elections were held. The Democratic Party won again, but the Socialists also rejected this result. Pyramid schemes. The pyramid schemes started operations in 1991. Their activity was based on making payments to old investors using money contributed by new investors. The first scheme was that of Hajdin Sejdizer, who later fled to Switzerland with several $1 million. It was followed by Suja of Maksuda Kadina in 1993, who had previously been employed as a worker in a shoe factory. Then came Populi foundations run by an opposition politician and ex-Haferi. By the end of 1996, the schemes peaked. The interest rates that they offered were very tempting. Suja offered 100% interest. The schemes were not criticized immediately because of a banking law adopted in 1994 which, on International Monetary Fund advice, contained no provision that the National Bank of Albania act as a supervisor of commercial banks. The IMF changed 2 years later, after the consequences had become visible. Despite IMF advice to close these schemes, the government continued to allow their activities, often participating in them. Between 8 and 16 January 1997 the schemes collapsed. On the 22nd of January the government froze the ex-Haferi and Populi firms. Gjallika, another firm, was nearly bankrupt, while Vefa, which had invested in Albanian hotels, fuel and factories, continued normal activity. The economic crisis was the worst in Albanian history. The first protest was on the 16th of January in the south. On the 19th of January in Tirana demonstrators protested the Suja creditors. On the 24th of January the de facto rebellion began. Thousands of people in Lushnja marched on City Hall in protest against the government's support of the schemes. The protest quickly descended into violence. Police forces were routed and the City Hall and adjoining cinema were burned. 1 day later, on the 25th of January, Democratic Party Chair Tritan Shehu was sent to Lushnja to resolve the situation. On his arrival he was held hostage for several hours at City Stadium and assaulted by the protesters. Albanian Special Forces units intervened in the city to extract Shehu. By the morning every government institution in the city was looted and destroyed. On 26 and 27 January violence erupted in other southern towns, such as Vlora. On 30 January the Forum for Democracy was formed by opposition parties to lead the protests. Anger was also directed against Berisha and the government for allowing the schemes to continue despite IMF advice, as allegations grew that Berisha and others in government had personally profited from the schemes. Many became convinced that the Democratic Party had to be removed by force. This was especially true in Vlora. On 4 February distribution of a portion of lost money began at the counters of the National Commercial Bank, owned by the state. Rather than quieting the protests, this action increased people's suspicion. A check for $550,000 paid by the Gjallika firm on 7 January to the Socialist Party accelerated the firm's collapse. On 5 February Gjallika declared bankruptcy and on 6 February violent protests resumed in Vlora. On 9 February state police were attacked in Vlora, and a day later, also in the south, 50 Special Forces troops attacked and brutally dispersed protesters. Hunger strike at the University of Vlora. Students at the University of Vlora began a hunger strike on campus on 20 February 1997, consisting of about 50 students. They demanded the government's resignation and the full return of invested money. On the 22nd of February the Forum for Democracy declared its support for the strike. Students from Gjirokasta and Elbasan also came to give their support. They were then driven by the FRESSH activists of Vlora to Tirana. In contrast, the students of University Luig Gurakusi and Shkadre did not take part, and its students' union declared, "The students share the pain of the citizens of Vlora in losing money in pyramid schemes, but on the other hand, think that freedom and democracy, homeland and nation have a higher price." On 26 February thousands of people surrounded the building of the university to defend it from a rumored attack by SHIK, the National Intelligence Service. The same day a group of strikers requested more medical help, raising doubts about the doctors near them. On 27 February in Vlora Shkadre, Mayor Bara Borisai of the United Right declared his support for the hunger strike. The next day was a decisive moment in Albanian history. After strengthening their perimeter around the building of the university, the rebel forces, without warning, attacked the SHIK building. In fighting between the rebels and government forces, 9 people, 6 officers and 3 civilians, were killed. This incident marked the start of a 10-day civil war and a year of violence in southern Albania. 10-day civil war. Demonstrators would never have succeeded in overpowering the Vlora police if they had not been armed and organized by local organized crime bosses and former members of the communist-era secret police, who saw this as their chance to damage the new political system. Typical of the latter was Albert, who returned from Greece with a private arsenal and set himself up as the head of the Vlora Committee of Public Salvation, a pattern replicated in other towns and cities in southern Albania. The 1st of March. The city of Vlora had no functioning government. The news of the massacre of SHIK officers had shaken the government. Rebels took control of the Albanian Navy Pasha main base. The government reacted by declaring a state of emergency and sent more troops to areas around Vlora and the town of Tepelena. In response, rebels set up cannons at the entrance of the city and pointed them towards Tirana. The 2nd of March. Alexander Meksi's government resigned after failing to resolve the crisis. The event was celebrated in the south by thousands firing AK-47s into the air. Parliament appointed Bashkim Gazida to try to restore order. Immediately Gazida ordered closure of schools throughout the country and imposed restrictions on the press and on consumer goods. The 3rd of March. DP re-elected Berisha as president with votes of DP members of the parliament alone. This led to massive riots in southern and central Albania. The city of Saranda was also captured by rebels, with fighters based out of Vlora arriving by boat and burning every government building in the city, including the city library. They also broke into the local detention facility and seized more than 400 guns. Gunmen burned down the vocational training center in Vlora. Meanwhile, SHIK tried to contain the rebellion to Vlora, Saranda and Elvina to stop it from spreading to the rest of the country. The 4th of March. The Committee of Public Salvation was formed in Vlora, headed by Albert. This committee began to act as a parallel government. Snipers occupied every building in Vlora and every street put up barricades to prevent attacks by SHIK. The Mafoli Bridge over the Vihose River was blocked and mined. As students ended their hunger strike, gunmen in Saranda used Navy craft to plunder weapons caches. Gangs patrolled the sea using Albanian Navy ships. Outside Saranda, one member of SHIK was burnt alive and another was taken hostage, while 2 others escaped. 50 soldiers joined the rebels and 2 Albanian Air Force pilots defected and flew their planes to Italy. The pilots claimed they were ordered to attack civilians. Gazida's plan to isolate the insurgency in Vlora failed, as it spread across the south. After fierce fighting in Delvina, the rebels forced the army to pull back. In Saranda, the rebels put up roadblocks. The 6th of March. Berisha held a meeting with representatives of political parties, who all signed a statement condemning the massive plunder of military warehouses and calling for surrender of weapons. 6 hours later, leaders of SP and DAP denied any responsibility and obligation towards the statement that they had earlier described as a political success. 7 to 8 March. The rebels from Saranda, in collaboration with local army forces, entered Gjirokastra and took some Albanian Special Forces troops hostage. The leaders of the revolting Gjirokastra were members of PAD, Arbanamami and Ridvane Peshkapia. With the fall of Gjirokastra, the entire south of the country was out of government control. Weapons continued to spread across the country. Tirana's Renas International Airport was attacked by villagers from the surrounding area, and the Agricultural University of Tirana was looted. The 9th of March. A government of national reconciliation unity was formed in Tirana, headed by Bashkim Fino, the mayor of Gjirokastra. The new government called on former army members to help restore peace and order. The president appeared on television making a statement to the nation that called for a reconciliation, faith, unity and calm. Unopposed on the battlefield, rebels in the south launched a wave of extraordinary destruction. In Grams they attacked a local police station. In fear they took control of the streets. Berat fell into the hands of gangs and became one of the main centers of rebellion. Polakan and Kelsira were taken over by criminal gangs. In Kukov, rebels took control of 19 Soviet-made MiG combat aircraft. The rebellion spread to the north. Prominent organized crime figures escaped from prison and put together gangs, effectively taking control of many areas. Gangs looted banks, took hostages and grabbed businesses. The chaos was complete and the whole country was completely paralyzed. Opening of the depots. The opening of the depots was the opening of weapons depots in the north, for protection against the violence of the south. The decision was taken by President Berisha. When southern Albanian bases were looted, it was estimated that, on average, every male from the age of 10 upwards possessed at least one firearm and ample ammunition. In order to protect the civilians in north and central Albania, the government allowed civilians to arm themselves from government arms depots. During the rebellion, 656,000 weapons of various types, along with 1.5 billion rounds of ammunition, 3.5 million hand grenades and 1 million landmines, were looted from army depots. International intervention. On 28 March the United Nations adopted Resolution 1101 for humanitarian aid to Albania, and on 15 April Operation Alba forces began to arrive, finally withdrawing on 12 August. About 7,000 soldiers in the multinational Italian-led UN mission came to Albania to restore order and rule of law. The first forces were deployed in Durrës. Normality first returned to Tirana. An element of the Operation Alba forces stayed in place, retraining the military to modern standards. This unit was joined from mid-May by members of WEU's multinational Albanian police element, doing the same with the police after restructuring the legislative base, which caused the problem. Snap elections. In the run-up to the 29th of June snap election for parliament, more than 60 people were killed. Socialist Party allies won the election, including in Tirana. Many members of the Rescue Committee stood for office, despite earlier promises to remain out of politics. The same election included a referendum on the form of governance. Republican government outpolled the monarchy by 65 to 35. North-South conflict. One of the main themes of Western media and analysts during the March riots was the North-South division. Various newspapers and TV stations claimed that the rebellion was not just a showdown between the two main political forces but also a clash between the northerners who supported Berisha and southerners who supported the Socialist Party. Gangs. Taking advantage of the difficult situations, criminal groups armed themselves and took control of entire cities. Most had been imprisoned in Greece, but suddenly escaped and returned to Albania. The most famous case is that of Zani Korzhai, who escaped from the high-security prison of Larissa in February 1997 and, with a group of friends, established the Gang of Coals in Vlora. In Vlora 5 gangs were created, but 2 ruled the city: the Gang of Zani and the Gang of Gaxhai. Movement in the city started at 1000, when people gathered in Flags Square to hear the Committee of Rescue, and ended at 1300. After that hour the streets were deserted and the only people who moved were gang members. Gangs announced through speakers and flyers that other people were not to go out as there would be fighting. Each night brought attacks with explosives and shooting, leaving dozens dead. In Berat Altan Dada's rule was even more severe. In Lushnja Aldo Bear's gang had control. The worst crime that this gang committed was to behead an opponent. Cities ruled by gangs were Vlora, Berat, Tepelena, Memaliaj, Balsha, Saranda, Girokastra, Lushnja, Pogradec, Sarikan Tropoja. Salvation committees were alleged criminal organizations set up during the rebellion in many regions, particularly the south. The committees de facto usurped the functions of the Albanian state.